My name is Klex, and I have witnessed many things during my 43 cycles of service aboard the Galactic Trade Federation vessel Stellar Wind. I have seen solar storms that could melt titanium, space pirates who'd sell their own mothers for a handful of credits, and diplomatic incidents that nearly started wars. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened when that stubborn human mechanic named Jake Thompson refused to give up on our dying ship. You see, we Zephyrians pride ourselves on being logical, practical. When something breaks beyond repair, you abandon it and move on. It's simple mathematics, really. Cost versus benefit. Risk versus reward. But sweet Nebula, help us. Humans don't seem to understand basic math when it comes to lost causes. The trouble started 3 days out from Nexus Station, right in the middle of the void sector. Our main fusion core began experiencing what our chief engineer Vorthive diplomatically called catastrophic molecular destabilization. In layman's terms, the thing was about to explode and take half the ship with it. Captain Malik, Vorth announced from his position at the engineering console, his forearms dancing across the controls with practiced efficiency. We have approximately 6 hours before complete core failure. I recommend immediate evacuation to the escape pods. Captain Malik, a distinguished Altarian with silver scales that caught the bridge lighting, nodded grimly. Very well, signal the distress beacon and prepare for abandonment procedures. Now this is where any reasonable species would cut their losses. The Stellar Wind was a good ship, sure, but not worth dying for. We had insurance. We had backup plans. We had common sense. What we didn't account for was Jake Thompson. Jake was part of the Human Engineering Exchange Program, something the Federation had started to improve interspecies relations. He'd been aboard for 2 months, and most of us had grown quite fond of the strange little biped. He was cheerful, hard-working, and had this peculiar habit of humming while he worked. Very odd, but harmless enough. Until now. Wait, Jake said, practically bouncing on his feet as he burst onto the bridge. His brown hair was disheveled, and there was some kind of grease stain on his uniform that probably violated at least 3 health codes. Did someone say we are abandoning ship, Mr. Thompson? Captain Malik replied with the patience of someone explaining quantum physics to a child. The fusion core is beyond repair. Evacuation is the only logical course of action. Jake's eyes, those strange blue things that humans have, widened with what I can only describe as horror. Beyond repair? Says who? Vorth's eye stalks swiveled toward the human with obvious irritation. Says physics, Mr. Thompson. The containment field generators have suffered irreversible damage. The magnetic bottle is collapsing. There is nothing to be done. Nothing to be done? Jake laughed. Actually laughed, like someone had just told him the galaxy's funniest joke. Buddy, you clearly haven't met very many humans. And that's when I knew we were in trouble. You have to understand, when most species encounter an impossible situation, they accept it with dignity. We make peace with our circumstances. We say our goodbyes. We move on to whatever comes next with grace and composure. Humans, however, seem to take impossible situations as a personal insult. Look, Jake continued, rolling up his sleeves in a gesture that every human seemed to make when they were about to do something monumentally stupid. I have been down in engineering for the past 2 months, right? I know this ship inside and out. Every bolt, every wire, every quirky little design flaw that makes her special. Mr. Thompson, I interjected, trying to be helpful, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, perhaps you should focus on reaching the escape pods safely. Jake turned to look at me, and I swear his grin got even wider. Klex, my friend, has anyone ever told you that you worry too much? Before I could point out that worry was a perfectly reasonable response to impending death, Jake was already heading back toward the lift. Give me 2 hours, he called over his shoulder. I can fix this. The bridge fell silent. Even the gentle hum of the life support system seemed muted. Captain Malik's scales had shifted to a pale purple, which in Altarian body language roughly translates to, "What in the 7 hells did I just witness?" Sir, Vorthad slowly, the human appears to be suffering from some form of mental breakdown. Should I have him sedated and forcibly evacuated? No, the captain replied, though he didn't sound particularly confident. Let's see what he does, but continue evacuation preparations. When the human inevitably realizes the futility of his efforts, we will need to be ready. Oh, Captain, If only you'd known what you were dealing with. I should mention that I'd developed something of a professional interest in human behavior during Jake's time aboard. They are fascinating creatures, really. They have this peculiar trait where they become more determined the more impossible a task becomes. Most species exhibit the opposite behavior, naturally scaling their efforts based on the probability of success. But not humans. Oh no, tell a human something can't be done, and they will take it as a challenge. So while the rest of the crew began the orderly process of preparing for evacuation, I found myself following Jake down to the engineering deck. Not because I thought he could actually fix anything, you understand. I just wanted to observe this bizarre human behavior firsthand. The engineering section was in chaos. Alarms were blaring, emergency lights were flashing, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. The fusion core, normally a sleek cylindrical monument to advanced technology, now resembled something that had been chewed up and spit out by an angry space dragon. Jake stood in front of the main diagnostic panel, rapidly scrolling through readouts that would have given our best engineers migraines. His lips were moving slightly, and I realized he was talking to himself. Another peculiar human trait. Okay, he was saying. Magnetic containment is shot, no surprise there. Plasma temperature is spiking, also expected, but the secondary stabilizers are still functional, which means... He trailed off, his eyes suddenly lighting up with what I could only describe as manic inspiration. Mr. Thompson, I said carefully, perhaps you should explain what you are planning to do. He spun around, and I noticed that the grease stain on his uniform had somehow multiplied. Klex, perfect timing. I need you to help me with something completely insane. I beg your pardon? The containment field is failing because the primary generators are fried, right? But what if we don't need the primary generators? I blinked my secondary eyelids, a Zephyrian gesture roughly equivalent to a human frown. I'm afraid I don't follow. Jake began pacing, his hands moving in animated gestures as he spoke. Every system on this ship has backup power routing, environmental navigation, communications, everything. It's redundant design at its finest, but fusion cores don't have backup containment systems because, well, if the primary fails, you are supposed to be dead anyway. Yes, I said slowly. That does seem to be the conventional wisdom. But what if we create our own backup system? What if we reroute power from every non-essential system on the ship and use it to create a makeshift containment field? The idea was so ludicrous that I actually felt my brain attempting to reject it. Mr. Thompson, that would require simultaneously interfacing with dozens of separate systems, recalibrating their power outputs, and somehow synchronizing them to maintain a stable magnetic bottle. The calculations alone would take weeks. Weeks for you guys, maybe, Jake said with that insufferable human confidence. But I have got something you don't have. And what's that? He grinned. Absolutely no idea how impossible this is supposed to be. Before I could explain the numerous ways in which his plan violated the laws of physics, engineering common sense, and basic survival instincts, Jake had already begun pulling panels off the walls. Literally, he was dismantling the ship around us. Ah, there we go, he said, exposing a rat's nest of conduits and wiring that I'd never seen before. See, this is why I love Federation ships. Everything's connected to everything else. You just have to know where to look. Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice rising slightly, those are load-bearing panels. You can't just... Sure I can, he interrupted, already elbow-deep in what appeared to be the ship's nervous system. Look, Klex, I know this seems crazy. Hell, it is crazy. But sometimes crazy is exactly what you need. I watched in horrified fascination as Jake began connecting systems that were never meant to be connected. He was essentially performing surgery on the ship's infrastructure, using tools that weren't designed for the purpose, and following no manual that had ever been written. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. Power coupling from the galley's food processors, he muttered, attaching something to something else in a way that made my engineering training weep. Backup generators from the recreational hologram systems, yes, that will do nicely. And if I can just tap into the waste recycling power grid. The waste recycling power grid? I squeaked. That's not even... You can't... The harmonics alone would... Jake paused in his work to look at me. Klex, buddy, you are thinking like an engineer. Sometimes you have got to think like a maniac with nothing to lose. But the safety protocols are written by people who assume you have time to follow them. Jake finished. We have got maybe 90 minutes before the core breaches. Safety protocols are a luxury we can't afford. As if to emphasize his point, another alarm began wailing, and the ship shuddered ominously. Somewhere above us, I could hear Captain Malik's voice over the intercom, calmly announcing that all non-essential personnel should proceed to evacuation stations. Jake, meanwhile, was humming again. That same little tune he always hummed while working, as if he were performing routine maintenance instead of attempting to violate several fundamental principles of engineering. You know what the problem is with most species, he said conversationally, as he somehow convinced the atmospheric processing system to shake hands with the artificial gravity generators. You are all too smart for your own good. I fail to see how intelligence could be considered a disadvantage. Because intelligence tells you all the reasons why something won't work. It shows you the obstacles, the risks, the probability of failure. Intelligence is great for normal situations. But this, he gestured at the chaos around us. This isn't a normal situation. This is what we humans call a hold my beer moment. Hold your what? Never mind. Point is, sometimes you need someone too stupid to know when to quit. I was about to inform him that stupidity was hardly a virtue when something extraordinary happened. The alarms stopped, not all of them, but several key ones that had been screaming about imminent core failure suddenly went quiet. Jake checked his improvised control panel, which now looked like something a demented artist might create if they had access to advanced technology and a complete disregard for aesthetic sensibility. Well, I will be damned, he said softly. It's actually working. I looked at the readouts, convinced that my eyes were deceiving me. But there it was, clear as starlight. The core temperature was stabilizing. The magnetic containment field was holding. The plasma that had been threatening to turn us all into our component atoms was now behaving like a perfectly domesticated pet. How? I whispered. Jake shrugged. Magic? That's not an answer. Okay, fine. I basically turned the entire ship into one giant containment system. Instead of relying on centralized generators, I distributed the load across every power system we have. It's inefficient as hell, and it's probably going to give your chief engineer nightmares for the rest of his life. But it works. Indeed, the ship was working, but it was also clearly not happy about it. Lights were flickering in patterns that suggested several minor nervous breakdowns. The artificial gravity kept hiccuping, making my stomach do interesting things. And there was a new sound, a sort of rhythmic groaning that suggested the ship was complaining about its current state of existence. Mr. Thompson, I said carefully, while I appreciate your efforts, this solution seems somewhat temporary. Oh, it's absolutely temporary, Jake agreed cheerfully. We give it maybe 6 hours before something else breaks. But 6 hours is enough to get us to Nexus Station, and once we are there we can do proper repairs. He began collecting his tools, apparently satisfied with a job well done. Besides, he added, temporary solutions have a funny way of becoming permanent if you maintain them right. I stared at him, this strange little human who had just accomplished something that should have been impossible. Mr. Thompson, how did you know this would work? Jake paused in his tool gathering and gave me a look that was part wisdom, part madness, and entirely human. I didn't, but I knew giving up definitely wouldn't work. So I figured I'd try the alternative. As we made our way back to the bridge, I found myself contemplating this alien logic. To attempt something with no guarantee of success, simply because the alternative was unacceptable, it was thoroughly irrational. It was inefficient. It was dangerous. It was also, I was beginning to realize, rather magnificent. Captain Mullick's expression when we arrived on the bridge was something to behold. His scales had cycled through several different colors during our absence, and he now displayed a pattern that I'd never seen before. It might have been confusion. It might have been awe. It might have been a mild panic attack. Mr. Thompson, he said slowly, my instruments indicate that our fusion core is functional. Yes, sir, Jake replied as casually as if he'd just refilled the coffee dispensers. Should be good for another 5 hours, 43 minutes, and 17 seconds, give or take. Give or take what? Oh, you know. Margin of error. Acts of God. The usual. The captain's scales shifted to what I now recognized as a sort of resigned acceptance. I see. And what exactly did you do to achieve this miracle? Jake launched into a technical explanation that made about as much sense as quantum poetry. He used terms like harmonic resonance cascade and distributed load equalization, and really crossing my fingers. Most of it sailed completely over my head, but the captain nodded along as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. Fascinating, the captain said when Jake finished, and this approach is standard among human engineers. Oh hell no, Jake laughed. This is completely insane. No human engineer in their right mind would attempt something like this. Then why did you? Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Because sometimes, Captain, being in your right mind is overrated. Sometimes you need to be just crazy enough to try the impossible. As we continued toward Nexus Station, riding on Jake's magnificent catastrophe of an engineering solution, I found myself wondering about the nature of impossibility. Was something truly impossible, or did we simply lack the imagination to see the solution? Humans, it seemed, had imagination in abundance. They also had something else, something that my species had somehow lost along the way to becoming civilized and rational. They had the audacity to tell the universe no when it tried to kill them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe blinked first. 3 hours later, as Nexus Station grew larger in our viewports, I made my way back down to engineering. Jake was there, naturally, fine-tuning his impossible creation with the dedication of an artist perfecting a masterpiece. "Mr. Thompson," I said, "I have been thinking about what you did today." "Yeah? What about it?" "You saved the ship, you saved all of us. And you did it by refusing to accept that it couldn't be done." Jake looked up from his work, his face smudged with grease, and his eyes bright with satisfaction. "Klex, my friend, let me tell you something about humans. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the smartest. We are not the fastest, or the toughest, or the most advanced. Then what makes you special?" He grinned. That same insufferable, wonderful human grin. We are too stupid to know when we are beaten, and sometimes that's exactly what the universe needs. As we docked at Nexus Station, I realized that I'd learned something important about humans that day. They weren't just another species sharing the galaxy with us. They were something new, something unprecedented. They were the species that looked at impossible odds and asked, "Yeah, but have you tried turning it off and on again?" And somehow, incredibly, it worked. But our adventure was far from over. As we settled into dock, Jake was already eyeing the station's repair facilities with the look of someone planning their next impossible project. "You know what this place needs?" he said thoughtfully. "I'm almost afraid to ask. Better coffee. And maybe some improvements to their fusion core efficiency ratings. I have got some idea." I groaned, but I was smiling as I did it. After all, someone had to keep an eye on the human, someone had to document the impossible things he did. And someone had to be there to watch him tell the universe no, the next time it tried to kill us all. Because knowing Jake Thompson, there would definitely be a next time. You'd think that after witnessing Jake Thompson perform what could only be described as engineering sorcery, I would have learned to expect the unexpected. You'd think that watching him turn our dying ship into a functioning, if somewhat neurotic, piece of machinery would have prepared me for whatever came next. You'd be wrong. 24 hours after docking at Nexus Station, I found myself sitting in the station's premier establishment, a place called the Quantum Cantina, sharing drinks with Jake and trying to process the events of the past day. The repair crews had spent the morning examining Jake's handiwork with expressions that cycled between admiration and horror. "Sir," Chief Engineer Vorth had reported to Captain Malik earlier, his forearms trembling slightly, "the human's modifications are theoretically impossible, practically functional, and aesthetically offensive to every engineering principle I hold dear." "But do they work?" the captain had asked. "Unfortunately, yes. In fact, they work better than our original systems. Core efficiency is up 12%, and power distribution is more stable than it's been since the ship left the shipyard." That was Jake Thompson for you. He didn't just fix things, he somehow made them better while completely ignoring the rules about how they were supposed to function. "So," Jake said, taking a sip of something blue and fizzy that the bartender had assured us was only mildly hallucinogenic, "what's the plan for tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we continue our shipping route to the Outer Rim colonies," I replied, "assuming, of course, that your miraculous repair work continues to hold together." Jake waved dismissively. "Oh, that will be fine. I installed some monitoring subroutines that should keep everything running smoothly. The ship's basically learned to fix itself now." I stared at him. "The ship has learned to what?" Well, not exactly learned. More like, I gave it some basic troubleshooting protocols that activate when certain parameters drift outside acceptable ranges. Sort of like an immune system, but for engineering problems. This was typical Jake logic. Not content with merely solving the immediate crisis, he'd somehow taught our ship to become self-aware enough to handle future problems. I was beginning to suspect that human engineering wasn't really engineering at all, but some form of technological witchcraft. Mr. Thompson, I said carefully, are you telling me that our ship is now sentient? Sentient? Nah, that would be crazy. It's more like responsive, adaptive. It knows when something's wrong and tries to compensate. Pretty neat, huh? Before I could explain the numerous ways in which creating accidentally sentient technology violated approximately 47 different Federation regulations, an alarm began wailing throughout the station. Not the gentle, polite alarms that indicated minor inconveniences, but the harsh, urgent ones that suggested imminent catastrophe. Jake and I exchanged glances. In the past day, I'd learned to recognize that particular look in his eyes. It was the look of someone who'd just heard the universe issue a challenge. We should probably see what's happening, I said, though I already suspected I wasn't going to like the answer. The station's central command center was in chaos when we arrived. Screens displayed warning messages in 17 different languages, most of which seemed to involve words like emergency, evacuation, and pray to whatever deities you find comforting. Captain Malik was already there, along with several other ship commanders who'd been docked at the station. Station Commander Yilix, a massive Grothian with hide thick enough to stop plasma bolts, was standing before a holographic display that showed, well, it showed something that shouldn't have been possible. Gentlemen, Commander Yilix announced in his booming voice, we have what you might call a situation. The hologram showed a massive object approaching the station. At first glance it looked like an asteroid. But asteroids don't usually move in perfectly straight lines or emit the kind of energy readings that made seasoned space officers break out in cold sweats. Is that? Captain Malik began. A Devourer ship, Commander Yilix confirmed grimly. Class 7 by our estimates, and it's headed straight for us. The command center fell silent. Devourers were the galaxy's worst nightmare, a machine species that consumed entire worlds for raw materials. They'd been dormant for over 1,000 years, relegated to the realm of scary stories told to misbehaving children. Apparently they'd decided to wake up. Estimated time to arrival? Someone asked. 4 hours, Ilix replied. Maybe 5 if we are lucky. And our defensive capabilities. Lix's laugh was about as cheerful as a funeral dirge. Nexus Station has standard defensive systems designed to handle pirates and the occasional smuggler. Against a Class 7 Devourer, we might as well throw rocks at it. What about evacuation? Captain Malik suggested. Already in progress, but it will take at least 6 hours to get everyone off the station, and that's assuming the Devourer doesn't have faster-than-light interdiction capabilities. Which they do, added someone helpfully. Devourers don't let their food escape. The mood in the command center was rapidly approaching what could politely be called funeral preparations. Various officers were making arrangements for final messages to be sent to loved ones, and I could hear someone in the background muttering what sounded like prayers in 3 different languages. That's when Jake spoke up. Has anyone actually tried talking to this thing? The entire command center turned to stare at him. Commander Lelix's expressions suggested that Jake had just suggested seducing the Devourer with interpretive dance. Mr. Thompson, the commander said slowly, Devourers don't communicate. They don't negotiate. They consume. It's literally their only function. According to who? According to 1,000 years of recorded history. Jake shrugged. Yeah, but how much of that history involves actually trying to have a conversation with one? Maybe they are just lonely. I felt compelled to interject. Mr. Thompson, while your optimism is admirable, I think you may be underestimating the severity of our situation. Klex, my friend, Jake said with that insufferable grin, have you ever known me to underestimate anything? That was a fair point. Jake didn't underestimate problems. He simply ignored them until they went away or exploded. Usually exploded. Look, Jake continued, turning back to Commander Relix. What's the worst that could happen? If talking doesn't work, we are in exactly the same situation we are in now. But if it does work, If it works, you will have accomplished something that's never been done in galactic history, the commander replied. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, you are a mechanic, not a diplomat. True, but I'm a human mechanic, and humans have a long history of making friends with things that want to kill us. Dogs, for instance, used to be wolves, dangerous predators. Now they fetch sticks and sleep on our beds. You are comparing a world-eating machine intelligence to a domesticated animal. Why not? They are both probably just misunderstood. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the station's air recycling systems humming. Finally, Captain Malik cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, while I appreciate your unique perspective, perhaps we should focus on more conventional solutions. That's when the station shuddered. Not the gentle tremor of docking procedures, but the kind of deep, bone-rattling shake that suggested something very large and very unfriendly had just arrived ahead of schedule. Correction, Commander Elix announced, checking his displays with an expression of grim resignation. The Devourer has dropped out of hyperspace. Estimated time to arrival is now 37 minutes. Well, Jake said cheerfully, looks like we are about to find out if my diplomacy theory holds water. Before anyone could stop him, Jake had somehow made his way to the station's communications console. His fingers danced across controls that he really shouldn't have known how to operate, and suddenly the main display was showing an outgoing transmission signal. This is Jake Thompson aboard Nexus Station, he said into the microphone, his voice carrying across space toward the approaching nightmare. I'd like to speak to whoever's in charge over there. The command center erupted in panicked whispers. Someone mentioned something about hastening our doom, while another voice suggested that Jake had finally suffered a complete mental breakdown. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the communications array lit up like a festival celebration. Well, I will be damned, Jake said softly. They are responding. The main display flickered, then resolved into an image that made several officers step backward involuntarily. The Devourer ship's interior was a maze of metallic corridors and pulsing lights, and at the center of it all was something that defied easy description. It might have been a machine, it might have been a creature. It was definitely large, definitely intimidating, and definitely not something you'd want to meet in a dark nebula. Greetings, small organic entity, it said in a voice that sounded like grinding gears having a philosophical discussion. We are designated as Harvester Unit Sigma Prime. We were not aware that local species had developed communication capabilities. Jake blinked. Wait! You guys thought we couldn't talk? Affirmative. Previous encounters with organic entities have involved only screaming and running. These activities were not interpreted as meaningful communication. Oh? Well, that explains a lot. So, what brings you to our neighborhood? The entity that called itself Sigma Prime paused, and I could swear I saw confusion in its mechanical features. We require raw materials for expansion and maintenance. This station contains suitable resources. Right, makes sense. But here's the thing, Jake continued, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. This station is kind of occupied at the moment. Lots of people live and work here. Would it be possible to maybe find your raw materials somewhere else? Negative. Our scans indicate optimal material composition at this location. Organic entities will be processed along with other available resources. Processed? Jake's eyebrows rose. That sounds ominous. What exactly does processing involve? Molecular disassembly followed by resource integration into Devourer infrastructure. Ah, yeah, that's definitely ominous. From our perspective, molecular disassembly sounds a lot like dying, and we are generally opposed to dying. It interferes with our long-term plans. I was watching this conversation with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Jake was negotiating with a machine intelligence that could reduce the entire station to its component atoms, and he was doing it as if he were haggling over the price of spare parts. Your opposition to termination is irrelevant, Sigma Prime replied. Resource acquisition will proceed as scheduled. Well, hold on now, Jake said, leaning back in his chair with that thoughtful expression that I'd learned to fear. You said you need raw materials, right? For expansion and maintenance. Affirmative. And you are planning to get those materials by disassembling our station. Correct. But what if I told you there was a better way? The mechanical entity tilted what might have been its head. Explain. Jake turned to Commander Ulix. What's the composition of that asteroid field about 3 light hours from here? Lelix, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone witnessing impossible events, checked his database. Primarily iron, nickel, and rare earth elements. Why? Because, Jake said, turning back to the communication screen, that asteroid field contains about 1,000 times more raw materials than this station, and none of it involves turning people into component molecules. You propose an alternative resource location? I'm proposing a trade. We will help you harvest that asteroid field more efficiently than you could on your own, and in exchange, you leave our station intact. Elaborate on this efficiency improvement. Jake's grin returned full force. Oh, see, humans have developed some pretty clever mining techniques over the years, and we have gotten really good at working with other species to accomplish things that none of us could do alone. You offer technological assistance in exchange for continued existence? More than that, I'm offering a partnership. The word partnership seemed to cause a minor malfunction in Sigma Prime systems. Lights flickered, mechanical sounds stuttered, and for a moment the entity appeared to be processing an entirely new concept. Partnership, it repeated slowly. This term is not familiar to our operational parameters. It means working together toward mutual benefit, Jake explained patiently. You get more resources than you could acquire alone, and we get to keep existing. Everybody wins. This concept requires analysis. Stand by. The transmission cut out, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Outside the viewports, the Devourer's ship hung motionless, a dark silhouette against the stars. Mr. Thompson, Commander Lelix said quietly, do you have any idea what you have just done? Hopefully. Bought us some time while they think it over. Maybe avoided a massacre. Started the galaxy's first human-devourer diplomatic relationship. And if they decide your proposal is unacceptable, Jake shrugged, then we are back where we started, except now we know they are capable of conversation. That's got to count for something. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of the most tense silence I'd ever experienced. Every officer in the command center was watching the displays, waiting for some sign of what the Devourers had decided. Then the communications array activated again. Harvester Unit Sigma Prime to Nexus Station, came that grinding mechanical voice. We have analyzed your proposal. And, Jake prompted, the concept of partnership is intriguing. We accept your offer of technological assistance in exchange for continued organic existence. The command center erupted in cheers, but Jake held up a hand for silence. That's great news, Sigma Prime. When would you like to begin operations? Immediately. However, we require a liaison to facilitate cooperation between our species. Someone capable of bridging the gap between devourer efficiency and organic creativity. I volunteer, Jake said without hesitation. I felt my internal organs rearrange themselves in panic. Mr. Thompson, you can't possibly… Actually, Clax, I think I can… This could be the start of something amazing. Think about it. Humans and devourers working together, we could accomplish incredible things. Or you could be molecularly disassembled the moment you step aboard their ship, I pointed out. Well, yeah, there's always that risk. But someone's gotta take the first step, right? And that, in a nutshell, was what made humans so simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. They were willing to take risks that would paralyze any rational species, not because they were ignorant of the dangers, but because they believed the potential rewards were worth it. Very well, Sigma Prime replied. We will prepare a docking adapter for your vessel. Liaison Thompson, we look forward to this partnership. As the transmission ended, Jake turned to face the assembled officers. Well, that went better than expected. Mr. Thompson, Captain Malik said slowly, you have just volunteered to become the galaxy's first human devourer ambassador. Are you certain you are prepared for such a responsibility? Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Captain, 3 days ago I convinced a dying fusion core to keep working by talking nicely to it and bribing it with power from the coffee makers. Yesterday I taught a starship to develop basic problem-solving skills. Today I made friends with a machine intelligence that eats planets for breakfast. He paused, then grinned. I'm pretty sure I can handle whatever comes next. 6 months later I received a transmission from the outer rim of the galaxy. It was Jake, of course. Looking healthy and surprisingly unstressed for someone who'd been living aboard a planet-eating machine for half a year. Hey, Klex, he said cheerfully from the communication screen. You have got to see what Sigma and I have been working on. We have figured out how to terraform dead worlds using controlled stellar manipulation. And get this, we are teaching other Devourer units about partnership protocols. Turns out they are actually pretty social once you get to know them. Behind him I could see what appeared to be a massive mechanical entity, wearing what looks suspiciously like a party hat. Oh, and tell Captain Malik that his ship's self-repair systems are working perfectly. Last report shows 0 maintenance issues for the past 4 months. The ship sends its regards. The transmission ended, leaving me to contemplate the strange turns my life had taken since meeting Jake Thompson. Humans, I had learned, possessed a unique talent for finding solutions in impossible situations. They didn't just think outside the box, they convinced the box to redesign itself into something more useful. But more than that, they had an almost supernatural ability to make friends with the unfriendable, to find common ground with the incomprehensible, and to turn enemies into allies through sheer stubborn optimism. The galaxy was a stranger, more wonderful place because of humans like Jake Thompson. They didn't just refuse to quit when faced with impossible odds. They turned those impossible odds into opportunities for something better. And somewhere out there in the vast darkness between stars, a human mechanic and a planet-eating machine were probably having coffee together and planning their next impossible project. Because that's what humans do. They look at the universe's biggest problems and ask, yeah, but have you tried being friends with it? And somehow, incredibly, it works.